Day 65, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. A newly recovered cloud storage file has just fundamentally altered the timeline of her disappearance. For over 2 months, investigators focused entirely on the events of February 1st. That was the night the 84-year-old mother of Savannah Guthrie vanished from her home. Now, forensic data specialists have pulled deleted video fragments from a doorbell camera server. These files show an unidentified male suspect scouting the perimeter of the Guthrie residence days before the actual abduction. The recovery of this data required advanced digital forensics. When a smart doorbell overwrites its local cache, the fragmented data often remains on remote servers. Technicians piece together these digital fragments to reconstruct the suspect's movements. The footage is grainy but definitive in its forensic value. The man in the newly recovered file matches the physical profile of the primary suspect. He stands roughly 5 feet 9 inches tall with an average build. He approaches the porch area specifically to examine the camera placement and security hardware. He does not wear the mask or carry the black Ozark Trail backpack seen on the night of the crime. This single data point shifts the entire classification of the case. Law enforcement initially treated this as a possible medical wandering event before upgrading it to a random home invasion. The digital evidence now points to a highly calculated and premeditated operation. The suspect targeted this specific house and understood the security blind spots. He evaluated the digital perimeter long before making a physical breach. Behavioral analysts state this level of preparation indicates a focused objective. Forensic teams are currently scrubbing regional cellular tower data. They hope to place his mobile device near the property during these preliminary visits. The implications of this discovery are profound for the ongoing search efforts. It suggests the perpetrator had a specific objective and a predefined exit strategy. A crime of opportunity is chaotic and leaves abundant physical evidence. A planned extraction is methodical and relies on technological suppression. This shifts the focus from local opportunistic criminals to individuals with surveillance capabilities. The central question is no longer just who this man is. We must determine how long he was watching the property before he initiated the sequence of events on February 1st. We also need to understand why this crucial surveillance video was missed during the critical initial 48 hours of the investigation. The delay in finding this footage allowed the suspect ample time to evade immediate capture. The answers lie in the digital forensics and the physical timeline. If you rely on verifiable forensic data rather than internet rumors to understand active cases, you should subscribe to Evidence with John as we track every development in this investigation. To analyze the failure of the initial investigation, we must first establish the confirmed timeline of that night. The sequence of events is built entirely on digital timestamps rather than human testimony. Human memory is flawed, but network logs provide objective facts. On January 31st at 9:48 in the evening, Tommaso Cioni drove his mother-in-law back to her residence. Cioni is the son-in-law of the victim. Law enforcement has completely cleared him as a suspect through rigorous alibi verification and vehicle tracking data. 2 minutes later at 9:50, the automated garage door closed and locked. This is the final confirmed moment the property was demonstrably secure. The timeline then experiences a complete blackout for nearly 4 hours. The neighborhood was quiet and no emergency calls were placed during this window. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the primary security protocol was breached. A masked individual approached the front entrance and physically disconnected the doorbell camera. The system registered the critical hardware failure and stopped transmitting live video to the cloud servers. This precise timestamp marks the transition from a secure residential environment to an active crime scene. The 4-hour gap between the garage closing and the camera disconnection is the primary focal point for investigators. During this window, the suspect moved into position without triggering exterior motion sensors. The suspect knew exactly where the camera was located and how to disable it quickly. This confirms the absolute value of the newly discovered scouting footage. He had already mapped the property and identified the specific hardware vulnerabilities. He moved with a practiced efficiency that suggests military or tactical familiarity. In less than 4 hours, a secure home was compromised and an elderly woman disappeared without triggering a neighborhood alarm. The physical disconnection of the camera was clearly meant to ensure total darkness for the extraction. The suspect believed destroying the hardware would eliminate all visual evidence of his presence, but a severed physical connection does not erase the residual data stored deep within the network infrastructure. That dormant data reveals the next layer of this complex forensic puzzle. The physical evidence captured on February 1st requires rigorous forensic deconstruction to understand the operational profile of the perpetrator. When the security system registered its final transmitted images before physical disconnection, it recorded highly specific details about the suspect approaching the threshold. Investigators have isolated and analyzed two primary pieces of equipment utilized by this unidentified male during the commission of the crime. He wore a facial covering designed to obscure his biometric features. He also carried a specific model of tactical or hiking bag. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, in coordination with local law enforcement agencies, identified the bag. It is an Ozark Trail hiker backpack. This specific model features a precise internal capacity of 25 liters. It is manufactured predominantly in a black colorway. It is sold exclusively through the Walmart retail distribution network across the country. From a strict forensic standpoint, this is a highly calculated and problematic equipment choice for investigators to track. The Ozark Trail brand is aggressively ubiquitous and inexpensive. Millions of these exact units are currently in circulation within the general population. This mass production and widespread availability make tracing a specific purchase almost mathematically impossible. Investigators cannot trace it without a localized point of sale or a digital financial transaction. The suspect almost certainly utilized physical currency to acquire this item. This avoids generating a traceable digital receipt in a centralized database. The choice of a black bag is a standard tactical decision. It is designed to minimize visual detection and light reflection in low illumination environments. The specific capacity of 25 liters is the most critical spatial data point in this entire analysis. A 25-liter internal volume equates to a standard day pack used for short excursions. It provides an inadequate spatial cavity for transporting a human body of any size. It is simultaneously excessively large for merely carrying standard burglary implements like lockpicks or small pry bars. This precise volume strongly indicates the suspect planned to transport items of moderate size away from the crime scene. We must logically evaluate what an intruder would intend to extract from the private residence of an 84-year-old woman in the middle of the night. The backpack could have contained specialized electronic equipment. This equipment could be utilized for disabling localized alarm systems or jamming cellular signals. Alternatively, it was brought to the location completely empty. The explicit intention would be removing digital storage drives, financial documents, or small valuable assets. The facial covering serves a critical dual purpose in this planned operation. It obviously prevents facial recognition algorithms from matching his geometry against state and federal criminal databases. It simultaneously acts as a psychological barrier. It masks any involuntary biometric stress indicators during the execution of the crime. The suspect exhibits absolutely no hesitation or erratic physical movements in the brief video fragments available for analysis. His gait is remarkably steady, and his approach is highly purposeful. This deliberate motion contrasts sharply with the often chaotic and reactive behavior demonstrated by opportunistic burglars experiencing severe adrenaline spikes. When forensic teams overlay the February 1st execution footage with the newly recovered preliminary scouting data, a definitive operational profile emerges. The earlier visits were systematic reconnaissance missions. They were designed to evaluate structural vulnerabilities and map the camera fields of view. The final approach was the execution phase of a finalized tactical strategy. He did not simply walk up to the door and react spontaneously to the environment. He navigated a predetermined path through the exterior property utilizing specific angles of approach. He positioned his physical body to minimize exposure to any secondary sightlines from neighboring residential properties. The mathematical precision of this movement isolates him from typical local offenders and suggests specialized training. He brought specific tools designed for a specific objective. Carrying an empty 25-liter backpack indicates a specific plan to remove something from the property. Yet a physical examination of the crime scene exterior reveals a completely contradictory reality. The physical environment outside the residence presents a severe spatial paradox that forensic teams are still struggling to logically resolve. Investigators processing the immediate exterior discovered a distinct biological fluid transfer located directly on the front porch area. Advanced laboratory testing procedures quickly confirmed the presence of human blood at this specific localized coordinate. Subsequent genetic sequence analysis matched this blood sample directly to the established biological profile of Nancy Guthrie. This confirmed DNA evidence establishes as a verified fact that physical trauma occurred outside the structural perimeter of the house. We must analyze this biological evidence within the strict parameters of the established digital timeline. Tommaso Cioni secured the residence and departed the premises at 9:50 in the evening. The victim was an 84-year-old woman. She relied heavily on daily specialized medication to maintain her physiological health. Her physical mobility was documented by medical professionals as significantly limited. She was safely located inside the locked structural perimeter when the automated garage door closed. Nearly 4 hours later, the suspect physically disabled the primary surveillance hardware on the porch. The subsequent deposition of her blood on that same porch indicates a violent physical intersection between the suspect and the victim at the exterior threshold. Blood spatter analysis evaluates the specific volume, distribution, and velocity of fluid to determine the exact nature of the physical trauma. A localized vertical drop pattern suggests a stationary injury where the victim was standing relatively still. A horizontal smear pattern indicates dynamic movement or a physical struggle across the concrete surface. The critical forensic question involves the mechanical spatial transition of the victim. The suspect approached a locked residential structure at 1:47 in the morning. Law enforcement agencies have not confirmed any signs of forced entry affecting the locking mechanisms of the exterior doors or windows. There is no confirmed structural damage indicating the suspect breached the house through physical destruction of glass or wood. How does an 84-year-old woman with documented limited mobility transition from a secure interior environment to an exterior active crime scene? Did the suspect utilize a sophisticated method of silent entry such as lock bumping or specialized tension tools to access the interior and physically force her outside? Or did the victim independently disengage the locks and open the front door in the middle of the night? This physical contradiction is the central anomaly driving the current phase of the investigation. The biological fluid proves definitively that she was on the porch and sustained an injury resulting in blood loss. The lack of confirmed structural breach suggests a total bypass of the physical security hardware. If you are analyzing this spatial paradox and want to contribute to the ongoing forensic discussion, you should subscribe to Evidence with John and leave your analytical theory in the comments. We need to evaluate every logical possibility regarding how the victim crossed that specific threshold. A forced physical extraction from the interior would typically generate significant acoustic noise and alert neighboring properties. A lured exit requires the suspect to possess a sophisticated mechanism of psychological manipulation to convince an elderly woman to open her door at 2 in the morning. This verified evidence forces investigators to entirely reconsider the sequence of events occurring immediately after camera transmission ceased. The blood on the porch is an undeniable physical fact anchored to a specific geographic coordinate, but it completely fails to explain the operational mechanics of the abduction itself. The exterior scene contains the biological signature of violence. The interior scene lacks the confirmed physical destruction typically associated with a violent home invasion. This profound division of physical evidence creates a massive hurdle for future prosecution if a suspect is eventually identified and apprehended. Any defense attorney will heavily exploit this lack of confirmed interior damage to aggressively challenge the state narrative of a forced, violent abduction. We are currently left with a compromised digital perimeter and a biological signature of exterior violence. The suspect executed a highly disciplined and methodical approach to the property. He disabled the visual recording devices with practiced precision. He brought specialized tactical equipment for an unknown secondary purpose. And yet an unpredictable event occurred on the porch that resulted in the deposition of the victim DNA. This implies the primary operation did not proceed flawlessly according to his plan. Something highly dynamic and violent happened at the threshold. The blood deposition is the solitary physical mistake in an otherwise sterile approach. This biological anomaly leads directly to the next critical phase of the forensic investigation. The responding authorities were initially presented with a missing elderly woman and a physically secure residence. They had to interpret the limited physical evidence available in the immediate confusing aftermath of the disappearance. The distinct presence of the blood should have dictated a highly specific operational response from law enforcement personnel. The failure to immediately recognize the severe implications of the porch evidence altered the trajectory of the entire forensic case. The initial procedural response to the scene at the Guthrie residence has become a focal point of intense forensic scrutiny and public debate. When the Pima County Sheriff's Department first arrived at the location on February 1st, they were presented with a complex physical environment. They discovered an elderly woman missing from her home, but the structural integrity of the house appeared entirely undisturbed. According to reports from News Nation and local investigative sources, Sheriff Chris Nanos and his primary responding units initially classified the event as a silver alert. This classification assumes an elderly individual with potential cognitive or physical limitations has voluntarily wandered away from their secure environment. Under this specific protocol, the primary objective is search and rescue rather than crime scene preservation. Consequently, the immediate exterior of the house was not cordoned off with forensic tape during the critical first few hours. Search teams, neighbors, and family members reportedly moved through the porch area where the blood evidence was later identified. This represents a catastrophic failure in basic forensic containment protocol. If biological evidence is present, any unauthorized foot traffic can cross-contaminate DNA profiles or destroy microscopic trace evidence like fabric fibers or soil deposits. The Sheriff's Department is now facing significant allegations regarding the potential destruction of the golden hour evidence. In a missing person case, the first 48 hours provide the highest probability of recovering viable physical leads. By treating the disappearance as a non-criminal wandering event, the department may have allowed the suspect to increase his lead time significantly. Forensic experts argue that the disconnected camera alone should have triggered an immediate criminal investigation. A wandering senior citizen does not physically disable a high-mounted security camera before leaving their home. This specific hardware failure was a definitive indicator of third-party interference. The failure to prioritize the porch as a primary crime scene has left a permanent gap in the evidentiary chain. Investigators are now forced to work with compromised biological samples that have been exposed to environmental elements and human interference. This procedural oversight is not merely a bureaucratic error, it is a fundamental breakdown in the investigative process. The transition from a search and rescue operation to a kidnapping investigation occurred far too late to secure the immediate perimeter. This delay gave the suspect over 48 hours to navigate out of the state or dispose of the tactical equipment used in the crime. The impact of this failure on the overall search for Nancy Guthrie cannot be overstated. It allowed a calculated perpetrator to vanish into the regional transit network without an immediate pursuit. We must ask why a veteran law enforcement agency would overlook such an obvious technological red flag. To understand the gravity of this oversight, we need to examine the subsequent digital forensic data that was recovered after the house was finally secured. The investigation is further complicated by a series of high-precision digital timestamps that refuse to align with a simple narrative of abduction. While the physical doorbell camera was deactivated at 1:47 a.m., the home's internal network continued to log background activity. At 2:12 a.m., the security software's motion detection algorithms registered a data TANDU, a residual trace of movement that occurred after the primary recording function was severed. This indicates the suspect remained on the property or re-entered the detection zone 25 minutes after he thought he had blinded the system. However, the most chilling forensic data point comes from an entirely different source. Nancy Guthrie utilized a pacemaker to regulate her cardiac rhythm, and this medical device was synchronized with a specialized monitoring application on her mobile phone. At 2:28 a.m., the application logged a total loss of connectivity with the pacemaker. This specific medical event is a critical biological marker in the timeline. It indicates one of three possibilities. Either the victim suffered a catastrophic cardiac failure, the mobile device was physically destroyed, or the victim was moved beyond the Bluetooth transmission range of the phone. The 16-minute gap between the motion detection at 2:12 and the pacemaker disconnect at 2:28 is where the most violent phase of the crime likely occurred. This timeline suggests the suspect was still at the residence for nearly 40 minutes after disabling the front camera. During this window, he had to manage the victim, deal with the medication she required, and ensure he left no obvious signs of a struggle inside the home. This leads back to the profound paradox of the interior scene. Despite the blood found on the porch, family members and independent sources reported the interior of the house was clean and untouched. There were no overturned chairs, no broken glass, and no signs of a desperate struggle for survival. If a violent extraction occurred, it was executed with a level of control that is almost unheard of in typical kidnapping cases. This suggests the suspect may have utilized a chemical or physical restraint that prevented the victim from reacting. The contradiction between the bloody porch and the sterile living room creates a massive investigative vacuum. It suggests the primary trauma happened exactly at the threshold of the door. The suspect may have lured her to the door, struck her immediately, and then moved her into a vehicle parked in a blind spot. Every digital log and every medical timestamp creates a more restricted window for his escape. Yet, despite this high-density data, the suspect managed to disappear into the Arizona night without a single witness. The clock is currently working against the forensic teams as they attempt to reconcile these conflicting layers of evidence. The time between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. is a 41-minute void that contains the answer to Nancy's location. If you want to see how these conflicting timestamps are being used to narrow the search radius, you should subscribe to Evidence with John as we analyze the latest cell tower pings. The investigation has now moved beyond the property line and into a much larger geographic search area. The most significant breakthrough in the forensic timeline did not occur at the residence, but 2 miles away on a desolate stretch of regional roadway. During an expansive secondary grid search, investigators recovered a single discarded glove. Initial visual inspection suggested it was a common industrial or outdoor accessory, but specialized laboratory processing revealed a much more complex evidentiary profile. Forensic technicians utilized a vacuum-based collection system to extract microscopic biological material from the interior fabric of the glove. They successfully isolated a DNA profile belonging to an unidentified male. However, this sample presented a severe technical challenge known as a complex mixture containing genetic markers from more than 2 distinct individuals. This suggests the glove may have been handled by multiple people or used over a significant duration. Because the primary profile did not produce a match within the National CODIS database, the FBI has authorized the use of investigative genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge process bypasses the limitations of standard criminal databases by cross-referencing the DNA against massive public ancestry and genealogical servers. Instead of looking for a direct match, the algorithm identifies third and fourth cousins, individuals who share a segment of DNA with the suspect but have no criminal record themselves. This forensic technique was the precise mechanism used to identify the suspects in the Golden State Killer in Idaho. 4 cases. By mapping out a family tree from these distant relatives, forensic genealogists can systematically narrow the suspect pool down to a single geographic area and a specific branch of a family. This represents the ultimate peak of the current investigation. While the suspect was meticulous enough to disable cameras encasing the property, he could not erase the biological signature left inside that glove. Every minute the FBI spends tracing these genealogical branches brings them closer to a specific name. This shifts the narrative from a cold case to an active digital manhunt. The suspect likely believes he is safe because he has no prior criminal record in the system. He is unaware that his own distant relatives have inadvertently provided the key to his identification through their own voluntary DNA submissions. If you believe that the intersection of DNA technology and traditional detective work is the only way to solve modern cold cases, subscribe to Evidence with John and share your thoughts on whether privacy laws should limit the use of genealogical databases in kidnappings. We are currently witnessing a race between the slow pace of genetic mapping and the urgent need to locate Nancy Guthrie. The suspect's decision to discard that glove 2 miles away may be the single largest mistake of his tactical career. It provides a permanent biological anchor to an otherwise phantom-like perpetrator. The current state of the investigation remains in a precarious holding pattern as the forensic community awaits the results of the genealogical sequencing. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 60 days. and the physical search for her remains or location has expanded into the rugged desert terrain surrounding Pima County. Law enforcement agencies have officially transitioned the case from a missing person search to a federal kidnapping investigation involving the FBI's Child Abduction and Serial Killer Task Force. This escalation brings significantly more resources to the case, including advanced satellite imaging and high-sensitivity thermal scanning of the region. Despite the lack of a named suspect, investigators have made it clear that they are tracking several individuals of interest based on the Walmart purchase records for the Ozark Trail backpack. While the sheer volume of these sales is immense, investigators are filtering the data for individuals who also possess the specialized technical knowledge required to disable high-end home security systems without triggering an immediate alarm. There are currently two major unanswered questions that continue to haunt this case and keep the audience invested in every update. First, what was the specific motive for targeting an 84-year-old woman with significant health issues? The sterile nature of the interior suggests this was not a standard robbery for financial gain. Second, where was the victim during the 40-minute gap between the camera being disabled and the pacemaker losing connectivity? This window is the most critical missing piece of the puzzle. Every day that passes without a recovery or a ransom demand increases the gravity of the situation. The community impact has been profound, with local residents in Pima County significantly upgrading their own home security and surveillance systems in response to the porch guy footage. We are currently standing at a crossroads where only a breakthrough in the DNA lab or a spontaneous tip from the public will provide the resolution this family desperately seeks. The investigation is ongoing, and the digital trail is still being scrubbed for any missed pings or overlooked surveillance frames from neighboring blocks. The case of Nancy Guthrie is a stark reminder that even in an age of total surveillance, a determined and calculated individual can still find a way to operate in the shadows, at least for a while. The vulnerability of our residential security infrastructure is often found in the very technology designed to protect us. This case teaches us that a physical disconnection of a camera is not merely a technical failure. It is a definitive behavioral red flag that demands an immediate criminal response. Most modern smart home systems rely on a continuous handshake between the local hardware and a remote cloud server. When that handshake is broken, the system generates a time-stamped error log that acts as a digital witness to the exact moment of interference. Homeowners must understand that while a suspect can disable a recording, they cannot easily erase the history of that disconnection from the service provider's infrastructure. Safety professionals now recommend that security cameras be mounted at a minimum height of 9 feet to prevent manual tampering without specialized equipment. Furthermore, the use of redundant power sources and cellular backup systems can prevent a suspect from blinding a property by simply cutting a wire or jamming a Wi-Fi signal. In the Guthrie investigation, the 16-minute window between the motion detection and the pacemaker disconnect highlights the life-saving potential of integrated medical monitoring. For families caring for elderly relatives, synchronizing medical devices with automated alert systems can provide the critical minutes needed for law enforcement to arrive. This case serves as a stark reminder that our digital footprint is often more resilient than our physical locks. What this case teaches us about premeditated abduction is that the most dangerous phase of a crime often happens days before the actual event occurs during the reconnaissance phase. By recognizing the signs of casing, such as unidentified individuals photographing property or testing camera angles, we can disrupt a suspect's tactical plan before it reaches the execution stage. The central mystery of Nancy Guthrie remains anchored to a single haunting question. Why did a calculated intruder bring a 25-liter backpack to the home of an 84-year-old woman? That specific detail suggests a plan for extraction that goes far beyond a simple kidnapping. Every piece of forensic data we have analyzed, from the scouting footage to the genetic signature on a discarded glove, points to a perpetrator who believed he could outsmart the system through sheer preparation. He manipulated the digital perimeter, exploited the procedural failures of local law enforcement, and vanished into the Arizona desert. But as the FBI's genealogical mapping continues to narrow the search to a specific family tree, his anonymity is rapidly eroding. The blood on the porch proves that a violent intersection occurred, and the digital logs prove exactly when the clock began to run out. This investigation is currently in its most volatile phase, and a single match in a DNA database will bring this entire structure of secrets crashing down. We will continue to monitor every court filing, every forensic update, and every press release from Pima County to ensure this story stays in the public eye. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, but the forensic net is tightening around the man who took her. If you want to be the first to know when the DNA results are finalized and a suspect is named, subscribe to Evidence with John and join our community of analysts tracking this case. The truth is hidden in the digital fragments and the biological traces, and we will not stop until every question has a confirmed answer.